Emily Parker adjusted the strap of her laptop bag and shifted in her seat. 12C on Flight 438. The hum of the engines was steady, almost hypnotic, vibrating faintly through the cabin floor. Around her, the passengers were lost in their own worlds. A young couple arguing quietly over seat arrangements. A businessman scrolling through endless emails. A mother trying to pacify her restless toddler. It was all ordinary, mundane, the kind of flight she had taken countless times. Yet for Emily, nothing about this flight was ordinary. She was passenger 126, a designation meant to conceal her true identity and her purpose on this journey. The boarding process had felt uneventful enough. She had walked through the gate, her Air Force ID tucked discreetly in her pocket beneath civilian clothing, and her documents carefully sealed inside a nondescript laptop case. Security had glanced at her, asked the routine questions, and waved her through. No one suspected she carried classified files intended for critical operational use. To anyone else, she was just another traveler, part of the sea of people moving through the terminal. Yet Emily felt the weight of her role pressing against her chest. A subtle tension she couldn't shake. She glanced at her watch. The flight was delayed by 15 minutes. A minor inconvenience for ordinary travelers, but every moment mattered for her. Outside the plane, the sunlight glinted off the polished fuselage, painting streaks of gold across the tarmac. Her eyes followed the movement of ground crews, trucks, and buses, ferrying luggage and equipment. She thought about the chain of coordination it took to operate such a flight, the invisible infrastructure of aviation that ensured everything ran smoothly. Her mind, trained to anticipate logistics, ran through checklists automatically. Boarding complete, passenger manifest verified, fuel levels correct, flight crew briefed. Even in this civilian setting, her military instincts remained sharp. The flight attendants walked the aisle with practiced grace, their smiles polite, their eyes scanning the cabin for comfort and compliance. Emily observed them carefully. She noted the gentle nod the lead attendant gave the co-pilot, a subtle signal in routine choreography that she had long studied in her simulations of emergency scenarios. She was hyper-aware of the people around her, who might be useful in a moment of need, who might panic, who might inadvertently compromise safety. Her eyes flicked to a man wearing a baseball cap, leaning forward and tapping on his phone, and she made a mental note. He was probably harmless, yet curiosity often led to unexpected observations. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Emily felt the familiar mix of anxiety and anticipation that accompanied every operation, no matter how mundane it appeared. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs fully. Her training had taught her to maintain calm, to appear unremarkable, even while executing tasks that could have far-reaching consequences. She adjusted her documents, ensuring nothing could be seen by curious eyes or cameras, and reminded herself of the rules. No phone calls about the operation, no revealing gestures, no identifying signs. To the outside world, she was passenger 126, just a number, just a name on a boarding pass. The plane lifted off with a smooth jolt. Emily leaned back, letting the seat's contour support her weight. Outside, the city shrank beneath a patchwork of streets, buildings, and rooftops glinting under the afternoon sun. Clouds stretched like waves across the horizon. Emily felt a strange sense of duality. She was part of the civilian world, floating above familiar terrain in a commercial aircraft, yet she was also part of something unseen, a network of operations and vigilance that extended far beyond the cabin walls. She glanced around the other passengers. A businessman had pulled out a paperback novel. A woman across the aisle was scrolling endlessly on her phone, headphones in place. No one noticed her, of course. No one would ever suspect the importance of her mission, The silent watch she was. Under even now. Yet Emily felt it. The invisible eyes, the discipline in the sky, the faint hum of precision that matched her own heartbeat. Somewhere above, trained pilots and monitors were tracking this flight, recognizing her presence in ways the passengers could never imagine. Memories of her training at the Air Force Academy drifted into her mind. She recalled long nights in simulation. Rooms practicing protocols for contingencies, emergencies, and tactical maneuvers. Her mentors had emphasized that even ordinary circumstances could conceal extraordinary moments, that vigilance must never waver, and that honor often manifests in quiet, unobservable ways. Emily adjusted her bag again, letting her hand rest on the smooth surface of her documents, almost instinctively checking that nothing had shifted. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight ascended further into the sky. Emily could see the sunlight fading through the oval window, painting long golden streaks across the seatback tray in front of her. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment to feel gratitude for her training, for the opportunity to serve, and for the invisible network of colleagues who are undoubtedly tracking her progress even now. The ordinary hum of the plane seemed almost musical, a rhythm that matched the steady pulse of her focus. Then, without warning, turbulence shook the aircraft. Emily's hand gripped the armrest instinctively, knuckles whitening. Around her, passengers murmured nervously, some clutching their drinks, others exchanging uneasy glances. The plane dipped slightly before stabilizing, and she allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief. Her attention, however, was unwavering. Her military instincts were alert. Her mind assessed, calculated, and anticipated. She thought about the flight path, the weather, the surrounding air traffic. Each variable mattered, even in this ostensibly routine flight. She glanced at her boarding pass again, the call sign almost invisible beneath printed text. Passenger 126, she whispered to herself. A private acknowledgement of her identity, a name that meant far more than the number suggested. She was aware that her presence was likely being noticed above, that skilled pilots could detect her location and intentions through protocols invisible to civilians. The thought both reassured and unsettled her. She wasn't alone yet, she had to appear as though she were just another passenger, anonymous in a crowd. Emily's gaze drifted toward the small window beside her. The city below had disappeared completely beneath clouds, leaving a soft white landscape that stretched to the horizon. The sun cast a warm glow across the top of the aircraft, illuminating the interior in soft light. She felt a shiver of anticipation. Even in moments of calm, she knew extraordinary events could unfold without warning. She adjusted her posture, keeping her demeanor casual, calm, and unremarkable. Every gesture, every glance, every movement had to be measured, precise, invisible yet intentional. Around her, life went on as usual. The toddler's cries had ceased, replaced by the soft hum of headphones. The young couple whispered quietly, seemingly oblivious. A businessman had returned to his emails. No one suspected the significance of the number 126. No one realized that somewhere above, disciplined pilots might be preparing to recognize her in a manner she would never forget. Emily allowed herself a faint smile, her eyes scanning the cabin. One last time before focusing forward, she was ready. The ordinary flight had become the stage for something entirely unexpected. Her mind returned briefly to her colleagues back on the ground, those who knew only fragments of her mission. They had instructed her to maintain discretion, to blend seamlessly into civilian routines, and blend she did. The uniform beneath her jacket was subtle, her badge tucked out of sight. She adjusted her hair and smoothed her blouse, ensuring nothing drew attention. Even as her heart raced beneath the surface, she projected calm, measured professionalism. To the world around her, she was just passenger 126, But Emily knew differently. Something extraordinary waited above. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude. Emily leaned back, closing her eyes momentarily. She could feel the aircraft's vibrations, rhythmic and reassuring. Her thoughts, however, remained sharp, focused. She reflected on every step that had brought her here. Training, discipline, late nights, sacrifices, and the invisible bonds that connected her to colleagues across the country. She had spent years preparing for moments she might never see, and yet she carried the confidence and resolve to act when called. A flicker of movement outside caught her attention. Sunlight reflected off something in the distance, metallic and precise. She blinked, unsure if it was a trick of the light or a cloud. Her pulse quickened slightly, but she remained composed. Whatever it was, she sensed significance. Passenger 126, she reminded herself. An ordinary number to the untrained eye. Yet she understood that in moments like this, perception could differ drastically from reality. Something extraordinary was approaching. Emily exhaled quietly and adjusted, the laptop in her lap, ensuring the documents were secure. She allowed herself one final, fleeting glance around the cabin. Every face was absorbed in mundane concerns. Conversations, phones, reading materials. The ordinary world pressed close, oblivious to the extraordinary circumstances unfolding beyond. The fuselage. She returned her gaze to the window, eyes scanning the clouds above, intuition tingling. For all appearances, it was just another flight. For passenger 126, it was the beginning of an experience that would forever redefine what it meant to be seen, recognized, and honored. Asterisk high above the clouds, Captain Mason and Lieutenant Vega settled into the cockpits of their F-22 Raptor fighters, the roar of the twin engines vibrating through the reinforced frames. The sun reflected off the canopies, casting golden glimmers across the instrumentation panels. Both pilots were disciplined, experienced, and hyper-aware of the airspace around them. Their orders were precise, routine patrol of a designated sector. Yet Mason noticed something that made his fingers pause on the throttle. Manifest check, Mason muttered, scanning the digital readout before him. He narrowed his eyes at the small, almost hidden line on the flight manifest. Passenger 126 USAF. The alphanumeric code flickered briefly on the HUD screen. Mason's pulse quickened. A silent recognition passed between him and Vega. "That's her," he said quietly, almost under his breath, but loud enough for Vega to hear. Vega's hand hovered over the control stick, acknowledging without words. The entire cockpit became a zone of heightened awareness, the air thick with professional anticipation. The civilian airliner below appeared ordinary, mundane even, a single dot moving across the vast expanse of blue sky. Yet Mason and Vega saw beyond the ordinary. They detected subtle indicators, patterns only visible to trained military eyes. The flight's altitude, trajectory, and even cabin pressure readings transmitted via air traffic links were more than numbers. They were markers of significance. Passenger 126 was aboard. She wasn't traveling for leisure, wasn't on a standard civilian route. She carried responsibility, vital information, and the trust of countless colleagues back on the ground. Vega's fingers tapped the cone panel with a rhythm born of years of training. "You see it too, Mason?" he asked, voice calm, even as adrenaline tingled beneath the surface. Mason nodded, scanning the instruments again. "Yeah, she's on board. Flight path aligns. No anomalies detected yet. We shadow her until landing. Visual only, keep it subtle." Their dialogue was professional, clipped, but each word carried the weight of shared understanding. They weren't just pilots. They were guardians of someone they respected deeply, someone whose presence in civilian airspace was unusual, yet critical. The two F-22s adjusted their positions, rising slightly above the airliner to maintain an unobtrusive formation. The pilots moved with meticulous precision, wings slicing through sunlight, creating shadows that danced across the clouds below. To any observer, it was a spectacular but ordinary flight maneuver, nothing unusual. But for Mason and Vega, it was a silent, protective dance, a tribute, an acknowledgement, and a safeguard all at once. They had rehearsed this scenario countless times in simulators, yet executing it in real life brought a pulse of tension that simulations could never replicate. Inside the airliner, Emily sat oblivious at first. Her eyes were focused on her laptop, reviewing documents, adjusting slides, double-checking encrypted notes. The cabin hummed around her. A toddler's whimper, the scraping of a cart down the aisle, passengers shifting in their seats, all part of the ordinary world she had to navigate. She felt calm, disciplined, composed. But somewhere deep in her instincts, she sensed a presence, a subtle disturbance in the ordinary flow of the flight. Her gut told her something was different, though she couldn't see it yet. Outside the plane, sunlight glinted off metal surfaces too sharp, too precise to be any ordinary cloud formation. Emily's eyes flicked to the windows instinctively. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw movement, shadows moving in ways the clouds shouldn't. Her pulse quickened, not in fear, but in recognition of something beyond her immediate understanding. Military intuition, honed over years of training, whispered, "You are being observed. You are recognized." The feeling was electric, a mix of anticipation and reassurance. She shifted slightly in her seat, adjusting the bag closer to her body. Back above her, Mason and Vega communicated in silent nods and subtle cockpit gestures. There were no dramatic maneuvers, no unnecessary displays, just the quiet precision of highly trained pilots executing a carefully choreographed observation. The jet's positions adjusted slightly, maintaining visual contact while remaining inconspicuous to civilian eyes. Each minor adjustment, each minor throttle change was calculated. They were professionals honoring another professional in the most visible yet discreet way possible. Every motion mattered. One slip, one sudden movement, and the signal could be lost or worse, cause alarm. Mason allowed his mind to wander briefly, memories surfacing like echoes of long-past missions. He recalled the first time he had flown an escort mission, years ago, under similar circumstances. The respect for colleagues, the unspoken code, the silent communication through maneuvers and formations. It was all training. Yes, but it was also a deeply human acknowledgement of shared dedication. And now, here it was again. Not an order, not a requirement, but a moment of honor performed above clouds, unnoticed by the ordinary world below. Vega's voice broke the silence, quiet but firm. "She's calm," he said, noting subtle cues in the flight path and altitude. Steady hands measured. "She knows she's being watched. She trusts us. Good." Mason exhaled, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Exactly. Let's keep it that way. Visual only. No interference, no disruption. Just acknowledgement." The jets adjusted again. Wings, reflecting sunlight in perfect symmetry, creating a fleeting, almost imperceptible pattern in the sky. For those below, it looked like coincidence. For the pilots, it was everything. Emily, seated quietly, adjusted her blouse, unaware of the precise choreography above. She focused on her documents, reviewing operational logistics, timelines, and mission-critical notes. Her concentration was meticulous, disciplined, professional. She had been trained to maintain composure in high-stakes scenarios, to act as if nothing extraordinary was happening, even when everything was. And yet, the faint flicker of movement outside the window kept pulling at her awareness. Something in her peripheral vision hinted at significance, subtle and almost imperceptible. Her pulse accelerated, not from fear, but from instinctive recognition. The airspace around them remained calm. Civilian traffic distant, weather stable, and clouds drifting lazily beneath. Yet Mason and Vega were alert. The Raptor's sophisticated sensors detected slight variations in the airliner's trajectory. Nothing threatening, nothing wrong, just enough to keep their vigilance engaged. Pilots of their caliber knew that. In aviation, nothing was truly ordinary, and someone as trained and important as passenger 126 deserved extraordinary attention. They maintained their positions, wings angled perfectly, engines humming steadily, shadows crossing the clouds like silent guardians. Emily finally lifted her eyes from the laptop, glancing toward the window once more. Something about the light, the shadows, and the sense of presence made her stop mid-thought. A subtle shiver ran down her spine, a mixture of anticipation and awareness. Somewhere above, professionals were watching, recognizing, acknowledging her quietly but definitively. Her heart rate quickened slightly, not from fear, but from the electric thrill of recognition. She was passenger 126, yes, but she was also someone who mattered to those who understood the stakes, the training, and the trust. Mason noticed the faint flicker of awareness in Emily's posture through the flight system's telemetry and visual confirmation. Though she could not see the pilots directly, she sensed a shift in energy, subtle but tangible. Vega adjusted the jet's formation slightly, signaling Mason. Every movement was calculated, every adjustment precise. The goal was perfect observation without disruption. The pilots understood that acknowledgement didn't need words, radio chatter, or fanfare. It existed in the form of precision, vigilance, and the quiet discipline of a salute performed in the sky. Emily's eyes widened as she glimpsed what she instinctively knew was a rare moment. Her mind raced, recalling training, mentors, colleagues. Recognition, respect, honor, all concepts she had learned in theory and practiced in simulations were now manifesting in a moment she could almost see, almost feel. She remained calm, her composure flawless, yet internally, exhilaration coursed through her veins. The ordinary flight had become extraordinary, transforming the mundane hum of engines into a stage for acknowledgement she had never expected. Mason and Vega maintained formation, flying with impeccable coordination, wings angled to catch sunlight, a silent tribute to a colleague below. They had rehearsed this, yes, in simulations, but now the stakes were real. Civilian passengers remained oblivious, their focus on screens, reading, and conversation. But for those in the cockpit, and the lone passenger aware of the moment's significance, time seemed suspended. They moved with shared understanding. A professional ballet performed thousands of feet above the earth, unnoticed but profoundly meaningful. Emily exhaled quietly, gripping her laptop, her mind racing yet calm. The invisible acknowledgement of her colleagues above felt like a warm, steady presence, a connection across space and altitude. She was no longer just passenger 126. She was recognized, honored, and subtly celebrated by people who understood her dedication and training. The ordinary hum of the aircraft became the backdrop for an extraordinary moment of respect. High above, two pilots had chosen to salute her quietly, perfectly, without drawing attention, and in that, Emily felt a surge of pride and belonging. The flight continued, cruising steadily at 30,000 feet. Mason and Vega adjusted subtly, keeping her plane in view, every movement calculated. Emily sat back, her eyes fixed on the window, sensing rather than seeing the silent guardians above. Every instinct, every memory of training, and every ounce of awareness told her this was a moment beyond ordinary comprehension. She had flown countless missions, but none carried this quiet, unseen acknowledgement. This rare honor executed with the precision only true professionals could achieve. And as the clouds drifted lazily below, Emily allowed herself a private smile. knowing that for one brief moment, her presence had been acknowledged, her dedication recognized, and her ordinary flight transformed into something extraordinary. All without a word, all without public fanfare. Emily adjusted her posture in seat 12C, glancing at the laptop screen, reviewing encrypted mission notes for the third time in 10 minutes. The hum of the plane was steady, the air-conditioned cabin warm and softly lit. Around her, passengers had settled into what they considered the routine of mid-flight. Whispers, scrolling phones, the occasional cough or shuffle. Yet Emily felt a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, a prickling at the edges of her awareness. Her military instincts, trained to detect minute anomalies, alerted her to something unusual. Something was different. A sudden jolt shook the plane. Slight at first, then more pronounced, rattling overhead bins and eliciting gasps from nearby passengers. A toddler cried, the wail piercing through murmurs of concern. Emily's fingers gripped the armrest tightly, knuckles whitening. This wasn't a natural turbulence pattern, she thought. She scanned the cabin. The couple across the aisle clutched each other nervously. A man in 12 muttered a curse and gripped his phone. Emily's heartbeat quickened, but not in fear. Focus, she reminded herself. Calm assessment, observation. Maintain composure. Outside the plane, the sky shimmered as if the sun were performing a subtle dance on the clouds. Faint flashes caught Emily's eye through the oval window, fleeting glints that were reflections of the sun on the wing. She blinked, adjusting her focus. For an instant, she thought she might be imagining it, but her instincts screamed. Otherwise, something or someone was in close proximity. She wasn't sure what or why, but the sense of being observed was undeniable. Her pulse raced, not from panic, but from anticipation. High above, Captain Mason and Lieutenant Vega maintained their positions, F-22s slicing through the air with surgical precision. They had adjusted altitude and trajectory multiple times to keep visual contact with the airliner, while remaining subtle enough not to alarm civilian observers. The jet's engines hummed a steady, powerful tone, a sound almost imperceptible to anyone below, but a rhythm that mirrored the pilot's intense concentration. Mason's eyes flicked to his HUD, confirming everything was on track. The civilian plane's slight turbulence provided the perfect cover for their calculated positioning. Inside the cabin, Emily's gaze returned to the window, and for a fleeting second she saw it, a shadow, sleek and metallic, moving with unnatural precision above the clouds. She swallowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. Her heartbeat accelerated, a thrill of recognition running through her veins. Her training at the academy flashed before her eyes, simulation after simulation, learning to notice the slightest deviation in trajectory, the faintest glimmer of anomalous reflection, the imperceptible rhythm of machines. She realized, with a mixture of awe and professional pride, that she was being observed, and not by ordinary eyes. The turbulence intensified slightly, jolting the cabin once more. Drinks sloshed in cups. A cart rattled down the aisle. Flight attendants moved swiftly, securing items and calming nervous passengers. Emily exhaled slowly, returning her attention to her documents while keeping her peripheral vision on the windows. She did not panic. Training kicked in fully. Scan, process, observe, anticipate. The sensation of being watched, initially unsettling, transformed into awareness of connection. The invisible network of colleagues and mentors silently orchestrating. The sky around her dot above, Mason and Vega coordinated in near-perfect synchronization. Their jets weaved subtly in the airspace, adjusting pitch and angle to remain within visual line of sight while avoiding detection by anyone on board. Every movement was deliberate, every micro-adjustment calculated. Vega's voice, calm over the comms, broke the quiet hum of the cockpit. Turbulence is mild. Flight is stable. She's maintaining composure. Mason nodded, eyes scanning the plane below. She knows. She's aware we're there. Keep formation steady. No interference. No alarms. Just observation and acknowledgement. Their mission was silent, invisible, and profoundly meaningful. Emily's eyes narrowed as she continued to watch the clouds outside, noticing subtle patterns that weren't natural. Reflections, glints, shadows shifting against the backdrop of blue sky. She felt the presence of the F-22s without seeing them directly. Her mind raced. How did they find me? Are they here to escort? Or is this something else? The questions ran through her carefully trained mind, but there was no fear, only the sharp, exhilarating thrill of recognition. Someone above, trained, disciplined, was acknowledging her. She almost smiled quietly, savoring the rare, unspoken connection. The passengers around her were oblivious. The toddler had quieted down. The couple across the aisle whispered trivialities, and the businessman continued tapping on his tablet. The ordinary world pressed in around her, mundane and unaware. Yet Emily's world had shifted completely. She was no longer just another passenger. Something extraordinary had entered her flight, something deliberate, precise, and remarkable. The sense of heightened awareness coursed through her muscles, her mind, and her chest. She remained calm, but internally, adrenaline surged with a steady rhythm. Mason allowed himself a brief flash of memory, recalling a training exercise involving escorting VIP personnel in civilian airspace. The principles were simple. Stay unseen. Remain precise. Convey acknowledgement without interference. But now, years later, in real life, it was different. Stakes were higher, emotions more palpable, and the object of their attention, Emily, was someone they respected deeply. Mason's fingers tapped lightly on the throttle, slight adjustments aligning their F-22 perfectly with the civilian planes. Flight path. Precision, honor, and respect manifested in motion. Vega mirrored Mason's subtle movements, wings cutting sunlight into sharp angles, reflecting gold and white against the clouds. They were both acutely aware of the importance of timing and subtlety. A single misstep could transform a respectful gesture into confusion, panic, or even danger. Every motion, every adjustment carried purpose. They didn't need to communicate. Verbally, years of training and shared missions allowed silent coordination. They were guardians above, executing a silent ballet in the sky with a level of precision that few could ever witness or understand. Inside the plane, Emily's focus wavered for only a moment. She glanced at the window and caught another glint of metal, a flash of sunlight on a smooth surface slicing through the sky. Her heartbeat quickened, but she didn't panic. Instead, she leaned back slightly, adjusting her documents and her posture, maintaining the calm, composed demeanor that had been drilled into her over years of service. Her instincts whispered the truth. She was not alone. The recognition she had sensed was real, deliberate, and profoundly meaningful. A sudden bump of turbulence sent another shudder through the cabin. Drinks sloshed, seat belts tightened, murmurs rose. Emily kept her composure, gripping the armrest, her knuckles pressing white. Her eyes flicked outside again. She saw the sleek silhouette, now unmistakably, gliding above the clouds with unnatural precision. The pilots were close, executing perfect formation maneuvers that most passengers could not comprehend. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, a quiet acknowledgement of the extraordinary presence above her. She allowed herself a single, controlled breath, savoring the thrill and connection. Mason and Vega coordinated silently, exchanging slight nods and micro-adjustments in response to the airliner's movements. They maintained a delicate balance, close enough to be detected by Emily, subtle enough to avoid alarming others. Every movement carried meaning, every shadow cast across the clouds a silent signal. The precision was nearly surgical, a testament to years of discipline and training. Mason's eyes softened briefly as he considered the human element: recognition, respect, and trust manifesting in the sky. This was more than a mission. It was an unspoken tribute. Emily's gaze returned to the documents in her lap, yet she was fully aware of the silent acknowledgement above. Her pulse remained steady, but her mind raced with professional exhilaration. She thought of the countless hours of training, the mentorship she had received, and the bonds of respect shared with colleagues she might never formally encounter. And yet here they were, expressing acknowledgement in the most extraordinary, invisible, and unforgettable way. The ordinary flight had become extraordinary. The mundane hum of engines had transformed into the backdrop for a silent, profound salute. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and Emily leaned back, letting herself absorb the moment. Outside, the sun reflected off the wings of the F-22s, casting brief flashes of brilliance across the clouds. She didn't fully understand the technicalities of their maneuvers, but instinct and training allowed her to interpret them. These pilots were professionals, acknowledging her presence, her dedication, her service. She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, savoring the silent, invisible moment. Passenger 126 was no longer just a number. She had been seeing Mason and Vega maintain their positions, ensuring their formation remained impeccable. They mirrored each other's subtle gestures, wings angled precisely, engines humming a rhythm that matched their focus. No words were needed. The pilot's intent was clear, a silent message delivered with perfect timing. Respect, recognition, honor. Emily's awareness of their presence intensified, her mind processing every micro-detail, every glint of light, every subtle shadow. The experience was exhilarating, humbling, and unforgettable. She allowed herself one private, controlled breath of relief and pride. The turbulence eased slightly, leaving only a faint vibration through the cabin floor. Emily adjusted her bag again, documents secure, posture calm. Outside, the F-22s continued, their silent ballet above the clouds, maintaining precise observation. The ordinary flight continued, unaware passengers oblivious to the extraordinary choreography unfolding above. And yet, for Emily, the world had changed. She was no longer just passenger 126. She was acknowledged, recognized, and silently celebrated, in a way that transcended words, medals, or ceremonies. Above, the sky bore witness to a moment of invisible, enduring honor. Emily's fingers lingered on her laptop, her attention torn between the documents and the faint glimmers of movement she sensed outside the window. The hum of the plane had become a steady rhythm, almost meditative, but her pulse betrayed the excitement that ran beneath her calm exterior. Something extraordinary hovered just beyond her perception, moving with precision she had never before witnessed in civilian airspace. Her military instincts, trained for decades of observation, simulations, and missions, screamed in recognition. Someone above, experienced, disciplined, was acknowledging her presence. A sudden flicker of sunlight reflected off a metallic surface high above the clouds, drawing her eyes upward. Her breath caught in her throat. For a split second, she questioned her own perception, wondering if exhaustion, nerves, or imagination had created the illusion. But as she focused, the reflection moved deliberately, a sleek, aerodynamic silhouette, gliding with purpose. It wasn't a bird, a drone, or a trick of light. Emily's heart began to race with controlled excitement. She was seeing the unmistakable form of an F-22 Raptor, the pinnacle of air superiority, executing maneuvers too precise to be random. Captain Mason and Lieutenant Vega were above her now, wings angled in perfect symmetry. Their training and experience allowed them to execute a synchronized movement that few could comprehend. With calculated precision, the jets banked in unison, forming a subtle but unmistakable signal, a visual salute. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like mere acrobatics, a fleeting display of power against the backdrop of sky and clouds. But Emily, trained to read both machines and people, understood immediately. It was a deliberate acknowledgement, a professional military gesture of respect reserved for those who shared their code of honor. Her breath caught in awe. She pressed a hand lightly to the window, feeling the coolness of the pane beneath her palm, as if seeking a tangible connection to the moment above. Memories of training, of long nights and simulations, of mentorship and guidance flooded her mind. Captain Mason had been one of those mentors, a figure of authority and wisdom who had shaped her approach to discipline, focus, and composure. And here he was, performing this rare and extraordinary salute in real life. Acknowledging her quietly from thousands of feet above, Vega mirrored Mason's movements flawlessly, wings slicing sunlight into precise angular reflections across the cloud tops. The two F-22s moved in perfect harmony, their trajectory and banking coordinated like an intricate dance. Every maneuver conveyed intent, respect, recognition, and honor. Emily's eyes widened as she observed the symmetry, her mind absorbing every detail, the subtle tilts, the angles, the glint of sunlight reflecting off the polished metal. Each motion was a silent message, a confirmation that her presence, her mission, and her dedication had been noticed and valued. A rush of exhilaration coursed through her veins. She felt a strange mixture of pride, humility, and disbelief. Only a handful of people in the world could understand what she was witnessing, and she was one of them. The F-22 pilots above were performing a gesture that transcended words, letters, or medals. A silent, airborne recognition of service, commitment, and professionalism. Emily's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Passenger 126 was no longer a number. She had been seen. She had been honored. The turbulence that had rattled the cabin earlier had now become a backdrop for the breathtaking display outside. Passengers shifted in their seats, some pointing toward the window, whispering in awe at the spectacle, but they remained unaware of its significance. To them, the jets were a marvel, perhaps part of a military training exercise or coincidence. But Emily knew differently. She recognized the precise calculation in every maneuver, the unmistakable intention behind the fleeting glimmers of light and metal. The salute was not random. It was hers. She leaned forward slightly, gripping the laptop bag to steady herself, her breath shallow with exhilaration. Every instinct screamed recognition, but her mind raced to maintain composure. She replayed moments of her career in her head, simulations where timing and precision were everything, exercises where subtle gestures conveyed information that could change the outcome of a mission. This was real life, and the stakes were personal. The pilots above were not only protecting her, they were acknowledging her. That acknowledgement was a rare gift, invisible to the outside world, but monumental to her. Mason and Vega continued their silent choreography, subtly adjusting their altitude and formation to maintain visual contact. Their movements were flawless, honed through years of training and countless flights. They were aware of every variable: air pressure, wind currents, the civilian plane's slight adjustments, and the necessity of remaining undetected by anyone else. Each micro-adjustment reinforced the message. Every slight tilt, every coordinated shift in position was intentional. Emily absorbed it all, recognizing the silent language of respect transmitted through the sheer precision of the aircraft. Emily's hands, still gripping her laptop, relaxed slightly as the moment unfolded. Her mind raced yet remained disciplined, cataloging every detail, The glint of the jet's metal surfaces, the angles of their wings, the coordinated banking, and the subtle shadows cast across the clouds. She understood the extraordinary trust being communicated. Trust in her abilities, trust in her professionalism, and trust in her composure under pressure. The pilots above were executing a silent recognition of her service that transcended ordinary acknowledgement, a tribute that few would ever witness or comprehend. She allowed herself a fleeting internal laugh, a surge of pride and amazement. Passenger 126 had been just a number on a boarding pass, an ordinary designation in a routine flight. Yet here she was, silently saluted by two of the most skilled pilots in the nation. The irony and beauty of the moment struck her profoundly. Ordinary life had transformed into something extraordinary, all because of discipline, skill, and unspoken understanding. Her chest swelled with emotion, a mix of humility and exhilaration. The F-22s executed a final, synchronized tilt, wings angled perfectly toward the sun, creating a fleeting prism of reflections across the clouds. Emily pressed her hand to the window as if to capture the moment physically, though she knew it was ephemeral. Her mind catalogued it in exquisite detail, every micro-movement and precise alignment. The salute was complete, executed without words, without noise, yet it carried the weight of decades of training, trust, and professional respect. She could feel it resonate in her chest, a pulse of acknowledgement that transcended physical space. Passengers around her were entranced by the sight, snapping photos, pointing, whispering in excitement, yet unaware of the depth of meaning. Emily, however, understood every nuance, every silent gesture. The pilots above were honoring her dedication, acknowledging her unseen labor, and performing a ritual that existed outside the knowledge of ordinary people. Her eyes brimmed with tears she refused to shed, holding them back with the discipline instilled over years of military training. She absorbed the moment fully, a rare, invisible recognition of her service. Mason glanced at Vega, a silent nod passing between them. The maneuver had been executed perfectly, the gesture delivered with precision and professionalism. Their mission above was complete, and yet the emotional weight lingered. The F-22s began to drift slightly, maintaining a safe distance while slowly preparing to disengage. They had communicated everything without a word, a language built on decades of shared experience, discipline, and understanding. Every line of flight had been intentional, every glint of light a message. We see you, we respect you. Emily's breath caught once more as the final movement settled into place. The jets began to pull away, retreating into the high sky, where they could no longer be clearly seen. Yet she could feel their presence, the resonance of their acknowledgement echoing through her mind and heart. Passenger 126 had been transformed into someone recognized, someone seen, someone honored. The ordinary flight had become extraordinary, and she would carry this moment forever. It was a testament to service, discipline, and the unspoken bonds that connected her to colleagues across the nation. The turbulence had now completely subsided. The cabin returned to its mundane rhythm, passengers adjusting, whispering, sipping drinks. Yet Emily sat still, her eyes still on the window, savoring the afterglow of the silent tribute. She pressed her lips together in a controlled smile, allowing herself a private sense of awe and pride. No one else needed to know. This acknowledgement was not for the world, it was for her. A rare and profound recognition, executed with precision and respect. As Flight 438 continued toward Los Angeles, Emily reflected on what she had witnessed. Training, mentorship, and discipline had prepared her for many things. But this silent, invisible salute from the sky was unparalleled. She understood that such moments were rare, ephemeral, and entirely meaningful. She allowed herself one final glance at the sky, imagining the F-22s retreating into the distance, carrying with them a gesture that would remain etched in her memory forever. Passenger 126 had been seen, honored, and celebrated in the quietest, most extraordinary way possible. The ordinary flight continued, passengers oblivious, turbulence gone, engines steady. Yet Emily remained suspended in the memory of the salute, the precision, and the acknowledgement. She understood deeply that this was more than symbolism. It was validation, respect, and recognition executed at the highest level, delivered without fanfare, witnessed only by those who truly understood. The F-22 pilots above had transformed her flight into a moment of quiet legend, one she would carry with her forever. Emily sat back in her seat, gripping her laptop bag loosely, her eyes still fixed on the window. The glint of sunlight undistant. Clouds reminded her of the F-22s, now fading into the horizon. Her pulse slowed slightly, but a warmth remained in her chest, a blend of pride, humility, and wonder. The realization sank in fully. She had just experienced a rare acknowledgement, a salute delivered not to her rank, her title, or her mission, but to her dedication and presence. It was deeply personal. Memories of the Air Force Academy flooded her mind. She could see the wide corridors of the dormitories, the late nights in study rooms illuminated only by flickering fluorescent lights. She remembered the rigorous drills, the exhaustive simulations that had pushed cadets to their limits, testing focus, resilience, and precision. Every mistake had been catalogued, every success celebrated, but most importantly, every act had been recognized by mentors who understood the nuances of discipline. Captain Mason had been one of those mentors, a figure of calm authority whose guidance had shaped her professional instincts. Emily recalled her first encounter with Mason during a flight simulation exercise. She had been tentative, unsure, her hands trembling slightly over the controls. Mason had observed quietly, intervening only when necessary, offering subtle guidance with a nod, a gesture, or a carefully chosen word. His mentorship had never been loud or theatrical. It was deliberate, disciplined, and deeply human. Mason had taught her to read patterns, anticipate movements, and remain calm under pressure. Every lesson now seemed to resonate with new clarity, amplified by the reality of the salute she had just witnessed. Vega's presence in her memories was equally vivid, though more subtle. He had often been in charge of peer evaluations, guiding cadets through practical exercises and simulations. While Mason's mentorship had been authoritative, Vega's approach had been collaborative, teaching by example, encouraging observation, critical thinking, and intuition. Emily had learned to watch, listen, and absorb knowledge silently, understanding the unspoken rules of communication, trust, and respect within the Air Force. These lessons had prepared her for the unexpected. They had taught her to recognize gestures without words, actions instead of explanations. The memory of her first solo flight as a cadet surfaced. She had felt a mix of excitement and fear, a sense of isolation that was both liberating and daunting. She remembered Mason's voice over the comms, calm and precise. Trust your training. Observe, anticipate, respond. Vega had been alongside her in simulations, providing subtle adjustments and feedback, reinforcing the importance of focus and patience. That day, she had learned the value of invisible support, of guidance that existed without spectacle, quietly shaping the outcome. That lesson now echoed in her mind as she processed the salute above her flight. Emily exhaled slowly, letting the weight of these memories settle alongside the thrill of the current moment. The salute from Mason and Vega had been extraordinary, precisely because it was quiet, subtle, and profoundly intentional. No words had been spoken, no announcement made, yet the message was crystal clear. We see you. We honor you. We respect you. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the acknowledgement, but for the bond it represented, an unspoken connection forged over years of shared dedication, mentorship, and trust. The passengers around her remained oblivious, chatting quietly, scrolling on devices, or sleeping. The ordinary world pressed against the cabin walls, unaware of the extraordinary events above. Emily understood that this was intentional. Recognition of true skill, professionalism, and dedication often exists outside public view, unseen and uncelebrated, yet profoundly impactful. She allowed herself a small smile, imagining Mason and Vega's precision in the sky, executing their tribute with a level of discipline that few could ever witness or comprehend. Her mind wandered to the significance of the moment. In a world obsessed with accolades, social media, and public recognition, here was a gesture that required none of it. It was a private acknowledgement, powerful precisely because it was invisible to anyone who did not understand. The symbolism resonated deeply. She realized that the bond between service members, the mutual recognition of effort, training, and dedication, transcended titles, ranks, and awards. It was a language spoken through precision, timing, an intent one that required experience and understanding to comprehend fully. Emily reflected on the countless exercises she had endured, the long nights studying operations, and the endless simulations where every decision had consequences. Those moments had felt tedious at times, repetitive, almost ordinary. Yet now, she understood their true value. They had prepared her to be recognized in a subtle, profound, and highly disciplined way. The salute was more than a gesture. It was the culmination of decades of training, mentorship, and professional development, distilled into a single, breathtaking moment in the sky. A soft vibration ran through the cabin as the plane adjusted altitude slightly. Emily tightened her grip on the laptop case instinctively, her eyes still drawn to the fading sky. She imagined Mason and Vega executing a final micro-adjustment in formation, their wings reflecting sunlight one last time, before disappearing into the high clouds. The thought brought a sense of closure, yet the resonance of the gesture lingered, like an echo in her chest. She felt deeply connected to them, to the Air Force, and to the invisible network of professionals dedicated to service, discipline, and honor. Her mind returned to the present moment. She was no longer just passenger. 126. She was a symbol of recognition, a testament to the impact of mentorship, training, and professional bonds. She could still feel the subtle electricity of the salute, the way it had brushed against her awareness like a gentle, invisible wind. The emotional weight of the experience was profound, a combination of pride, humility, and exhilaration. She understood that such moments were rare, ephemeral, yet enduring in memory, carrying lessons and inspiration long after the aircraft had passed. Emily allowed herself a deep, controlled breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She visualized the F-22s executing the final maneuver, wings angled perfectly, glinting in the sunlight, carrying the silent message across thousands of feet of sky. The precision of the gesture mirrored the lessons she had absorbed from Mason and Vega over the years. Calm under pressure, attention to detail, respect for skill and dedication. That lesson had manifested in the most extraordinary and personal way, leaving an indelible mark on her heart and mind. She opened her eyes, gazing around the cabin, observing passengers as if seeing them for the first time. The ordinary world moved obliviously, yet she carried with her the extraordinary memory of acknowledgement. She felt a deep sense of gratitude not only for the salute, but for the mentors, colleagues, and experiences that had prepared her to be worthy of recognition. Every late night, every drill, every simulation had contributed to this singular moment. Recognition, she realized, was most powerful when it was earned silently, observed discreetly, and acknowledged thoughtfully. The plane leveled slightly, engines humming steadily. Emily returned her attention to her laptop, but the documents felt lighter now, her hands steady, her focus sharper. She allowed herself to reflect on her own growth, the lessons learned from Mason and Vega, and the countless others who had shaped her career. Their guidance, discipline, and mentorship had prepared her for a world of unpredictability, challenges, and responsibility. The salute had affirmed not only her efforts, but the values and principles instilled in her from the earliest days of training. A quiet calm settled over the cabin. Emily adjusted her bag, ensuring her documents remained secure, yet her mind lingered on the sky, on the salute, on the invisible connection forged through precision, discipline, and respect. The F-22s were gone from sight, but the impression remained. She allowed herself a private smile, savoring the combination of thrill and humility, exhilaration and reflection. Passenger 126 was no longer merely a designation. She was a participant in a rare, profoundly personal moment that transcended ordinary recognition. Emily's thoughts turned toward the future. She knew that moments like this would shape her approach to service, mentorship, and leadership. She would carry the lesson forward, that acknowledgement does not always need a stage, applause, or public fanfare. True recognition is often subtle, invisible, and profoundly impactful. The experience of being seen, respected, and honored in such a deliberate and disciplined way would inform her interactions, her decisions, and her understanding of the bonds of trust and respect within her profession. Her eyes lingered on the window one last time, imagining Mason and Vega retreating into the high skies, their precision and intent carrying the message far beyond her immediate perception. She allowed herself to breathe fully, embracing the mixture of pride, humility, and gratitude that coursed through her. The salute had been more than acknowledgement. It had been affirmation, connection, and a reminder of the extraordinary possibilities that exist within the seemingly ordinary. Emily leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The cabin hummed, passengers continued their routines, and the plane cruised steadily. Yet within her, the memory of the salute glowed vividly, an indelible mark of respect, trust, and mentorship. She had been seen in a way few would ever understand, honored in a manner that transcended words. Passenger 126 had become someone recognized, valued, and profoundly touched by the invisible bonds of professionalism, discipline, and unspoken respect. The ordinary flight continued, but Emily's perspective had shifted permanently. She understood now that service, training, and dedication were noticed, even when invisible to the world. The salute had transformed an ordinary journey into a deeply personal experience, one that would resonate through her career, memories, and understanding of honor for the rest of her life. Asterisk. The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm as Flight 237 began its gradual descent. A voice over the intercom announced the transition into U.S. airspace, instructing passengers to return to their seats and fasten seatbelts. Most complied without hesitation, sliding trays into place and stowing electronics. The cabin vibrated, with small movements, seatbacks clicking upright, bags shifting beneath seats, and children tugging at their parents' sleeves. Emily, though, sat motionless, her gaze fixed out the small oval window. Her reflection merged with the fading horizon, illuminated by streaks of late afternoon sunlight. Beyond the glass, faint contrails whispered across the sky, traces of Mason and Vega's F-22s, receding into the distance. They were gone now, disappearing into layers of clouds, but the impression of their salute clung to her mind like a watermark. The pilots had executed their pull-away with seamless precision, tilting wings in one final acknowledgement before accelerating upward in a steep climb. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing more than a maneuver. To Emily, however, it was a punctuation mark at the end of their tribute, a signature written across the sky. She recognized it instantly, felt it resonate deep within her bones, as if Mason and Vega had whispered directly into her memory. For a moment, she considered telling the passenger beside her what had just happened. A middle-aged man in a polo shirt tapped idly on his phone, completely unaware of the extraordinary choreography above. His eyes flickered with boredom, waiting only for the plane to land and his journey to end. Emily opened her mouth, thought better of it, and closed it. Again, how could she possibly explain it? Words would flatten the moment, strip it of its discipline, its weight, and its unspoken honor. No, she decided it was hers to keep. Her fingers tightened on her laptop case. The plastic felt cool against her palm, grounding her. She remembered Mason's voice during training exercises. You'll know respect not by what's said, but by what's shown. Those words had seemed abstract at the time, just another lesson scribbled into her cadet's notebook. Now they carried flesh and breath, etched permanently into her memory. The salute had not been for an audience. It had been for her. The intercom buzzed again. The flight attendants moved briskly through the aisles, checking seatbelts, securing overhead bins, offering smiles that were polite but rehearsed. The ordinary rituals of descent played out seamlessly. Yet Emily's heart continued its quiet thunder. She wondered whether Mason and Vega were already streaking back toward base, filing their reports, perhaps even exchanging a knowing glance about what they had just done. She imagined them walking into their ready room later that evening, still wearing helmets marked with sweat and condensation. They wouldn't boast about the salute. They wouldn't need to. Such things weren't meant for stories or accolades. They lived in the quiet archive of memory, in the vault of unspoken gestures that carried deeper meaning than words ever could. She knew, because she had been trained to understand. The seatbelt sign dinged overhead. Emily adjusted in her chair, shifting slightly to peer once more through the glass. Clouds thickened below as the aircraft pierced their upper layers, sunlight fragmenting into shafts of amber and gold. Shadows danced across the cabin, and passengers drew their window shades to block the glare. Emily left hers open. She wanted to hold on to the sky for as long as she could. Her thoughts turned toward the symbolism of the moment. Most passengers saw the flight as a routine journey, point A to point B, a temporary inconvenience of cramped seats and recycled air. But for her, it had become a living metaphor. She had entered the plane as passenger 126 Anonymous, unremarkable, part of a list. Yet she would leave it transformed, carrying a story stitched invisibly into her identity. She realized she would never again look at an aircraft's descent, its controlled glide through layers of atmosphere, without remembering the salute. The descent grew steeper. The engines shifted pitch, vibrating through the floorboards and into Emily's bones. She closed her eyes briefly, hearing echoes of drills and simulators, the metallic thrum of cockpits, Mason's steady instructions, Vega's sharp observations. They had trained her to respect precision, to interpret silence, to appreciate the language of flight. And now, that training had come full circle. They had spoken to her not with words, but with wings, angles, and sunlight. She opened her eyes as the first glimmers of land broke through the cloud cover. Green and gold patches stretched across the horizon, fields, rivers, and winding roads, bathed in late-day glow. A ripple of murmurs passed through the cabin as passengers pointed toward the ground, some eager to return home, others simply relieved the long flight was ending. Emily remained quiet. Her world had already shifted in the sky above. The land below was only a backdrop dot. Her pulse slowed, settling into a steady rhythm. She thought of how she would carry this memory forward. Would she tell colleagues? Perhaps. But only those who could understand, those who recognized that the truest acknowledgments require no audience. She imagined sitting in a briefing room. Someday, listening as a young cadet asked whether respect in the field was earned through rank or reputation. She would smile quietly, remembering this day, and reply, "Neither. Respect is shown in ways no one else sees." The captain's voice cut through the cabin again, announcing their final approach. The aircraft tilted gently, banking left, aligning with the runway invisible beyond the horizon. The city below began to sharpen. Clusters of buildings, highways, alive with tiny dots of traffic, rivers glinting like molten silver in the fading light. Emily pressed her forehead to the cool window. Somewhere out there, Mason and Vega were cutting through different skies, their aircraft invisible yet indelibly etched in her heart. She whispered silently into the glass, not expecting an answer. "Thank you." It wasn't a word she had spoken often, not aloud, anyway, but it carried a weight equal to the salute itself. The flaps deployed with a mechanical groan. The plane shuddered slightly, aligning with the descent path. Passengers straightened, gripping armrests. Some closed their eyes. A child squealed with excitement. Emily sat still, steady, calm. Her storm had already passed, her skies already transformed. The landing was nothing more than a return to ground, a formality dot as the wheels finally screeched against the tarmac and the cabin jolted forward. Applause broke out among a few passengers, an old ritual, half mocking, half sincere. Emily did not clap. She simply inhaled deeply, absorbing the subtle scent of scorched rubber and recycled air, grounding herself in the moment. Her descent was not about touching earth. It was about carrying the sky within her. When the plane slowed to taxi, passengers unclipped seatbelts, eager to rush into the ordinary world. Phones powered on. Text alerts chimed. The cabin filled with the restless energy of arrival. But Emily stayed still, her gaze on the fading horizon. To everyone else, the journey had ended. To her, it had just been rewritten into memory, transformed by the silent salute of two F-22 pilots who had chosen to see her, honor her, and remind her who she was. She whispered again, so softly no one else could hear. Passenger 126 saluted. The cabin lights brightened with a soft chime as the plane rolled toward its gate. Passengers stirred in a collective wave of impatient seatbelts snapped. Open, overhead bins clicked, and carry-on bags tumbled into waiting hands. The energy shifted from quiet endurance to restless escape, the singular urgency of people desperate to reclaim their place on the ground. Emily remained seated, her seatbelt still fastened. She had learned long ago not to rush. In training, Mason had once said, "The first lesson of discipline is patience. Everyone else rushes, we wait. That's how you see the world clearer." His words echoed now as she watched the people around her scramble. The man in the polo shirt beside her side, craning his neck toward the aisle. "Always takes forever," he muttered, already powering up his phone. A cheerful chime signaled. A flood of incoming texts, the banal chorus of modern life waiting to swallow him whole. He didn't notice Emily's steady composure, nor would he have understood it if he had. Finally, the line of passengers shuffled forward, dragging luggage with clumsy determination. Emily rose only when half the cabin had already emptied, retrieving her bag with quiet efficiency. She stepped into the aisle, the soles of her shoes pressing against the carpet worn by countless travelers before her. The narrow corridor led her past smiling flight attendants offering rote farewells. "Thank you for flying with us. Have a wonderful evening." Emily nodded politely, but said nothing. Their words felt too light for the weight she carried. The jet bridge buzzed faintly as she walked through it, the air cooler and tinged with the scent of fuel. For most passengers, the bridge was simply a passage from one world to another, from sky to ground, from journey to destination. For Emily, it was something else entirely, a threshold between the extraordinary and the ordinary. With every step, she felt the memory of the salute slipping into the recesses of her mind, like a sacred secret retreating behind locked doors. Inside the terminal, noise assaulted her. Announcements blared over speakers. Rolling luggage clattered on polished tile. Children cried, and travelers hurried past with the weary determination of people who had already mentally arrived before their bodies did. Emily adjusted her bag. On her shoulder, enjoying the current. On the surface, she looked like any other passenger, hair pulled back neatly, clothes simple, face unreadable. No one would have guessed she carried a story that could never appear in headlines. A gesture so rare and profound, it would live only in the whispered corners of military memory. As she moved through the terminal, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, unwilling to dilute the silence still humming inside her. Finally, she checked. A message blinked on the screen from a familiar number, her squadron liaison. You made it safely. Heard from ops that 2 birds shadowed your flight. Anything to report? Emily paused mid-step. Her throat tightened. So word had already traveled, passed quietly through the invisible channels that connected those who understood. She typed. Back a single line? They saluted. The reply came quickly, as if waiting. Copy. That's rare. Hold on to it. Emily slipped the phone back into her pocket. She didn't need more than that. Within those simple words lay a recognition deeper than any medal, any commendation, any ceremony. Her colleagues would know exactly what it meant, even without explanation. It was a gesture reserved for those who had earned respect beyond hierarchy, beyond formal acknowledgement. The crowd around her thinned as she exited into the cool evening air. The city stretched out in front of her, alive with headlights and neon signs, alive with people who would never know about the salute that had painted itself across her life. She inhaled deeply, the scent of asphalt and jet fuel mingling in her lungs. For a moment, she wondered if she should tell her family. Her parents had always supported her career with pride, though they understood little of its nuances. Would they appreciate the weight of 2 F-22s peeling away in silent respect? Or would it sound like some technical maneuver lost in translation? Between military precision and civilian ears? She imagined trying to explain. They saw me. They honored me. The words felt inadequate, almost hollow. This was not a story for the dinner table. It was for the quiet moments when she needed to remind herself why she served, why the sacrifices mattered, why her work, often unseen, often thankless, carried weight in ways no one else could measure. Emily hailed a cab and slid inside. Driver greeted her with a tired nod, asking where she was headed. She gave him the address of her temporary quarters and leaned back, watching the city roll by through streaked windows. Neon reflected off the glass, blending with her own faint reflection. For a brief second, she imagined Mason and Vega flying. Overhead, their jets slicing across the night sky, unseen by the people below. Her thoughts drifted back to the salute itself. It hadn't been a grand spectacle. There had been no fanfare, no cheering crowds, no medals pinned on uniforms. Just a tilt of wings, a shift of formation, a subtle acknowledgement. Yet it carried more weight than any ceremony she had ever attended. She realized then that the true power of the moment lay in its invisibility. It wasn't for the public. It wasn't for history books. It was for her. And in that private, sacred space, it meant more than anything visible could. When she reached her quarters, Emily unpacked slowly. She placed her laptop case on the desk, her uniform badge on the dresser, her shoes neatly by the door. Each motion was deliberate, a ritual of grounding herself back into ordinary life. But the sky lived within her still, vibrating quietly in her chest like a second heartbeat. Later that night, she sat at her desk, unable to sleep. She opened her journal, a habit she rarely indulged, and began to write. Not about the mission, not about her duties, but about the salute. She wrote of the contrails against the sky, of the subtle wingtip movements, of the silence that had carried more meaning than words. She wrote Mason's old phrase again: respect is shown, not spoken. Her handwriting was steady, her words unadorned. She didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. She simply recorded the truth as it had been lived. She knew the journal entry would never be shared, but it was enough. The act of writing preserved the memory, etched it into permanence. Somewhere across the country, Mason and Vega were likely sleeping now, their jets parked on the tarmac, their helmets resting on racks. They wouldn't speak of what they had done. They wouldn't need to. In the quiet language of their profession, the act itself was enough. Emily closed the journal and turned off the light. The room fell into darkness, but the image of the salute glowed within her, a private constellation she could carry into every mission, every challenge, every doubt. She lay back on the bed, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, and smiled to herself. She had been passenger 126, anonymous and unnoticed. But tonight she carried the sky within her. And though the world might never know, within her, circle among those who understood her story would live as a quiet legend, whispered not with words, but with respect. Years passed, but the memory never faded. Emily had risen through the ranks steadily, carrying herself with the same quiet discipline that defined her years in service. Her career was never marked by flashy headlines or dramatic scandals. Viral photographs, no award ceremonies broadcast on national television. Instead, it was a career built on steadiness, on resilience, on showing up every day with a sense of duty that never wavered. And yet, when people asked her about defining moments, her mind never went to the obvious milestones. Not her first overseas deployment, not the day she pinned on Major, not even the commendation ceremonies where she shook hands with decorated generals. It always went back to that flight, the day she was only passenger 126, until two pilots tilted their wings and told her, without words, that she mattered. The memory had aged like fine glass, fragile, but gleaming, intact in every detail. She could still picture the curve of the contrails against a blue canvas, the subtle dip of wings, the way the sunlight glinted off the F-22's sleek bodies. Most of all, she remembered the feeling, a flood of humility and pride, all wrapped in the quiet knowledge that someone had seen her, truly seen her. Now, seated at her desk years later, Emily ran her hand along the edge of a framed photo that sat beside her. It wasn't of the salute itself. No one had captured that moment. Instead, it was a candid shot of her squadron years earlier, helmets in hand, sunlight pouring over their shoulders. Mason was there, laughing. Vega stood with his arms crossed, smirking faintly. She herself was in the corner, squinting at the camera, young and unshaped, not yet aware of how the years would mold her. So many of them had scattered. Some had left the service, finding new lives in business, or teaching, or engineering. Some had stayed, climbing into positions of responsibility. And a few, Emily paused. Her throat tightening had been lost along the way. For them, too, the salute had become more than memory. It was a reminder that the bond they shared transcended distance, time, and even death. When younger officers asked her what kept her going, she never mentioned medals or promotions. Instead, she told them stories, not the classified ones, but the human ones. She told them about the time Mason stayed up all night to help her prep for a test she thought she'd fail. About the day Vega pulled her aside to say, "You don't have to shout to be respected. You just have to deliver." And sometimes, in hushed tones, she told them about that flight. She never embellished it. She never turned it into myth. She simply said, 2 pilots saluted me once from the sky. They didn't have to. But they did. And that told me everything I needed to know about what we stand for. The younger ones always leaned in, eyes wide, imagining what that must have felt like. Some asked if she had pictures. She always shook her head. Some things aren't meant to be photographed, she'd reply. They're meant to be carried. And she did carry it. Through every deployment. Through every sleepless night. Through every difficult decision where doubt clawed at her resolve. The salute was there like a compass, a reminder that unseen recognition often carries more weight than public applause. Years later, when Emily transitioned from active duty to a quieter role in training and mentorship, the story followed her. She didn't tell it often, but when she did, it landed with weight. Her cadets, wide-eyed and restless, learned from her that the smallest gestures could leave the deepest imprints. One night, after lecturing a group of young officers in training, a cadet approached her shyly. "Ma'am," he said, "do you really think those pilots knew what it meant to you?" Emily smiled softly. "Yes," she answered without hesitation, "because it meant something to them too." The cadet tilted his head. "But it was just a salute." Emily shook her head. "No, it was never just a salute. It was recognition without needing explanation. That's the strongest kind." The cadet nodded slowly, the lesson settling into him like a stone dropped into water, its ripples unseen but inevitable. That night, Emily realized the true legacy of the salute wasn't in her memory of it. It was in how it spread quietly through others, through the way she carried it into her words, her mentorship, her presence. Decades after that flight, when she finally hung up her uniform for good, she kept one journal entry locked away in her desk, the one she had written the night after landing, describing the contrails, the tilt of wings, the silence that spoke louder than words. The pages had yellowed, the ink had faded, but the meaning remained unbroken. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would pull the journal out and reread that entry. And without fail, the image would return sunlight, contrails, the silent dip of wings, a private constellation in her sky, untouchable by time. To the rest of the world, she had been just another traveler on a cross-country flight. No one in the terminal had known what happened. No one on the ground had looked up at the sky with the awareness of what those jets were doing. History books would never record it. But for Emily and for Mason and Vega, wherever their journeys had taken them, it was enough. It became a legend, not in headlines, but in whispers, not in archives, but in memories. It lived in the spaces between words, in the looks exchanged, between those who served, in the unspoken understanding that respect in its purest form doesn't need an audience. And so, long after she had left the skies behind, Emily carried the legacy of that moment. Not as passenger 126, anonymous and unremarkable, but as someone who had once been saluted in silence, mid-air, by 2 of the finest pilots in the world. A salute no one else saw, a salute no one else needed to. Because sometimes the most extraordinary legacies are the ones carried quietly, forever etched into the sky of a single life.